Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and jump on this workshop around alternative provision and the organisation I work for, Olive Academies. Because we're quite a small group, very select but small group, instead of, I'd really appreciate it if and it works a whole lot better. If there are any questions as we go along, please put your hand up. And I've got a colleague from Olive Academies with me, Colette Honeysett, who will be able to look at the chat and then or look at hands and be able to jump in, and we can answer questions as we go along. So lovely to meet you all in this workshop. My name's Adam Tedesco. I'm the Deputy CEO of Olive Academies. We are a specialist multi-academy trust. AP is our specialism, and we're based predominantly in the east of England, from northern Cambridgeshire down to an academy in Thurrock, Essex, and we've also got one academy in the London Borough of Havering, and we're just about to start open another academy in Kent. So we're working across a range of areas, needs, local authorities, commissioners. Before I get going, and please feel free if it's just general that you want to, the general overview of what we're doing and what's happening in our world is why you're here. But if there's anything specific that you might want to discuss or ask or have come onto the workshop for, please either put your hand up now and we can discuss that, so I make sure that I answer it and hopefully address it, or put it in the chat and we'll try and address it as we go through. But I'm really keen that you're here and you've made the time, that you get out of it what you're looking for. Okay, so I'll move on. So just that's a slide, fancy agenda slide. We're going to try and go through all of those 4 things. We didn't quite manage to get to the last one in the last workshop because so many great questions, but that's what we'll endeavour to do. So where I'm going to start is around the national context of AP. So if we could just get to the next slide, Adiba, please. So the current picture, it is just a little caveat, it's about a year out of date. We haven't got the bang up to date data on this, so it's a little bit out of date. But the last time there was some validated data around this, there were just under 32,500 young people in registered AP. So just make clear that we're talking about AP schools and PRUs, so maintained provisions, not unregistered provision, because there's a whole nother subset of young people in those, which we don't have. Nobody seems to have really their finger on and can tell us exactly how many are in those provisions. Across those 32,500 young people, roughly 348 settings that's registered either as a PRU, an AP Academy, or have started as a free school, and then obviously under the Academies Act will then become academies within, and that are managed directly centrally by the regions groups. You can see the pie chart does indicate that there is a growing percentage of young people in AP, academy-based APs and PRUs. And that number has grown, although under the current administration that doesn't seem to be growing as quickly. But that just gives you an overview of how many young people we're talking about and how many schools we're talking about. It is worth noting that number has gone up significantly in the last 12 months. We know that just from what we're hearing from our sector. So that was a year ago. We are expecting, when we do get the next data set, that will be significantly more. Okay, Adiba, if we could move on, that'd be great. So just an overview of the network that represents those 348 schools. So we're Olive Academies, as well as running our schools, one of the very lucky roles that we have is that we chair what's called the National Network for AP and SEND MAT CEOs. So any MAT that has a specialist provision within it is entitled to be part of that network. So although there's only 348 settings, there's significantly more MATs with only one setting who are represented in that network. The reason I say that is because we're able to get their thoughts and feelings on the AP and PRU sector quite easily and readily. And we're very, as it says there is a warm encouragement feeling amongst us that it's moving in the right direction for our sector in terms of engagement with the DfE and the DfE and the wider education sector understanding what we bring, and that's, that can only be a good thing. And as we move through this process of AP becoming a significant part of the SEND continuum, we've got more and more confidence in the DfE understanding what high quality AP looks like. And it's not just about a very, very narrow data set around a small amount of children. It's about how we can impact across a wider range of provision and areas along that continuum. So there is a general good feeling about where we sit on that, but we've got the same concerns that Amanda and that raised in her, in her initial session about how we feel about SEND generally. Of course, we feel that as well. We're working with the same young people, but in terms of how AP is being recognised and used, there is a confidence there that the DfE are engaging with us and understand what we're doing. That being said, the challenges, and we couldn't do this without looking at the challenges that the AP sector are facing at the moment. So if Adiba could just go onto the challenges slide, that would be helpful. The two biggest ones is that within both mainstream sectors and within AP, the complexity of the needs of the young people are growing, and the anxiety and SEMH needs that are then leading to negative behaviour, which is the symptom of those needs, is growing as well. And you're only that exclusion data, that's not our network data, that is the national data from a year ago, that you can see that the reasons for young people getting into AP improves. Is always when Colette and I have been working in this sector for over 10 years, forever it was about one-off incidents where a child might have done something that was against those rules, and and they couldn't stay there for a particular reason, but it was one reason. Whereas now it's that persistent defiance, persistent frustrated behavior, increased complexity of needs that can't be met through normal, then the normal mainstream offer is leading to permanent exclusions, which means the numbers are rising. So mainstream schools are having to deal with more, hence why we're going to move into the next slide, which is what actually happens if those needs are rising. What does that actually mean? Well, those numbers are quite stark. Again, this data is not a national data set. This is a survey that we did with our network, the one I just explained. So I'm not here to say this is a national data set. It should be used in that way, but this is from a representation of a sector that's been working in this sphere for a long time. So 63% of AP settings and PRUs that we surveyed have reported that the threshold for permanent exclusion and managing behaviours that lead to permanent exclusion has gone down, and it's less tolerant than it was, which obviously is quite a significant stat. That's from COVID mainly, that period of time, and the increase in need and complexity of need is meaning that schools aren't able to deal with as many young people. Tolerances go down, and then that word of respite comes into it. We're excluding to give respite to the school, to the class, to the teacher, to the environment, the community. Is it meeting their needs? There's a question that we need to answer. Reintegrations. High quality AP is all about young people moving in for a short period of time, getting what they need, having their needs met, understanding, and then working with the mainstream schools to get them back into wider environment. That's what the majority of young people in AP should be doing. But that number there is, again, quite stark. 70% of schools are less inclined to do that. We know the reasons for it. There's more young people in there who need their support. So how do they bring people back in from AP and support them appropriately? And the one that is probably the most stark, anybody who knows the AP improved sector knows that generally you start 40 to 50% full in September, and then as needs progress throughout the year, then your AP will then start to fill up, and that's how you base your commissioning on. 87% of our members reported that their AP settings were full in September, which is quite a start figure, and one that worries us. And even in a couple of our APs, we're not quite full in September, but we were up to 80% full, and that's never ever happened before. So there AP specific challenges, what I would just like to move on to before I just hold for questions is that obviously the AP sector is also very vulnerable to national challenges as well. So commissioning, commissioning standards, commissioning principles, money that's in and around the SEN system. We are as vulnerable to that as anybody else, and that is something that is being reflected in what's happening to AP and PRUs nationally. Recruitment and retention, you won't be surprised, there's a recruitment crisis within education. AP is no different to that. And in fact, it's a lot more acute because there's even less people who want to work in our sector. And even more importantly, retaining, once we get good people and we train them in how to work with these young people who have vulnerable needs, they are then highly valued by mainstream schools. So they move from our environment back into a mainstream environment, which is great because it's building capacity, but not so good if you're running that school. And then attendance. Just to give you a little bit of a jolt, maybe, for the first time recorded history of AP, attendance in AP and PRUs hasn't been recorded systematically prior to maybe 7-8 years ago, but it dipped below 50%. It's like 49.7%, I think, is the current figure of attendance nationally in APs and PRUs, where it was before COVID was just below 70%. So you can see that attendance issue that is mainstream schools facing is obviously acute in our sector as well. So that's the challenges. I'd very much welcome any questions or reflections or thoughts on that part of the presentation around the national context. Okay, I'll move on if that's all seems quite simple. Right, what is alternate provision? So the next part of this presentation is about what Olive Academies deem as high quality alternate provision. So very simply put, we believe alternate provision, proper alternate provision, high quality, impactful alternate provision isn't just about the bit in the middle of that continuum. It is a continuum of inclusive practice. So yes, we will work with young people who are permanently excluded. Yes, we will do short stay intervention places. Yes, we will work with medical students who can't, for whatever reason, be in a mainstream school for a period of time. That's absolutely, but that should be a small part of what we do. What we also believe, and what we do in the areas that we have a school in, is that is a much wider piece of work that we should be commissioned to work with our mainstream colleagues in a variety of creative ways to improve inclusive practice within a mainstream environment. Our schools, our mainstream schools, the majority of them, they are very inclusive, but we're talking about those young people who sit between who traditionally have been in an AP and are in a mainstream school and get along fine. There's a cohort of people who need additional support, and schools need that support as well. And we believe through like I said, a variety of creative ways, working with parents, assessment places, non-medical, clinical diagnosis of needs. So young people who might need a clinical diagnosis later on around SEMH or ADHD, but we could get in there earlier and actually say, yeah, we recognise those symptoms, try this. Have you thought about this? How about this as a strategy that works with us? And then we should also be working on integration back out of our academies. So working with special schools, working with post-16 providers, working with our mainstream colleagues, that young people, they don't need to stay with us. If we're doing our job properly, there will always be young people who stay with us. Of course there will, because that's the right provision for them. But what we should be doing as high quality AP is moving along that continuum of inclusive practice. And that's why I think the reflection that I got from Christine Lenihan's presentation earlier around some of the principles, the working principles that the EAG are working to, fit really closely with what Olive's doing. The idea of inclusion by design, that's what that is. That's what we should be doing. That a tiered approach inclusion should be about a tiered approach. It shouldn't be in silos. It shouldn't be working individually. So what does that look like in terms of actually on the ground AP? If we can just go to the good, thank you, Adiba. So what makes successful AP? Broken down, it's actually really quite simple. if you get those four components working in that circle and that going around in that, you can start at any one of those places. It doesn't really matter. But if you get all four of those things working, you will have a successful AP landscape within your local area. So we've started with recognitions of the challenges. So we'll start there. We've talked about the challenges. Let's take SCMH. It's a rising need. But what does that mean? We're not trying to be just a small mainstream school. We want to meet the needs of the young people. So recognizing the challenges, then working with our LA or our MAT or our school, whoever, to define what that cohort is. AP is not a catch-all for any young person who's not in mainstream or in a special school that doesn't have an EHCP. That's not what we are. AP we need to know what we're dealing with. We need to be commissioned, understand the cohort, and then be commissioned to deliver the right level of need and provision for the level of need. And then the one at the bottom, maybe I should turn this around and actually in high standards expectations be on the top. But again, going back to Christine Lenahan's working principles for the EAG, ambition. Unless you've got high standards in AP, it will never work. Gone are the days where it's at best a youth club, at worst place to hothouse young people until they're 16. That is not appropriate. It never was. And if you don't have high standards and expectations, it's never going to work. Right. So I'm going to leave it I'm not going to do the next slide, Adiba. So if any questions on what AP should look like, I'm more than happy to take that now. Is that someone? Ros, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, yeah. How are you?
I'm good. I wanted to come to this workshop because I was really impressed. You've done a review in Brighton and Hove of our AP provision and so on, and which made me think I want to know more about Olive Academies. But my question is about the kind of diversity of provision that seems to work for some young people, and how that works for you as a sort of like an academy trust running AP. When sometimes what we see is parents saying, well, the one thing that will kind of catch my young child and pull them back in is something outdoors or something. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Did you know what our next part of this presentation was, Ros? Because you've just segued into it very nicely. So you've just done a very nice introduction for me. Thank you very much. Right. So unless there's any other questions, I'll answer Ros's questions with the next couple slides, because I think this will answer exactly what you want, unless there's anything else. Okay, Adiba, what we'll go to just is the slide with the map of the UK, please. So just before I get into that, answering that question, I've got 5 academies across 4 local areas, 2 academy regions. So the reason for that slide is really quite simple. Isn't just to count up academies and say we're getting bigger. What it is about is trying to show you that we work across a whole spectrum of commissioners, and they all want something different. And the needs of our young people in Nene Valley, which is in northern rural Cambridgeshire, in an environment which is significantly deprived because of economic manufacturing, loss of manufacturing industry, through to London Borough and Havering, which has massive areas of affluence, and obviously in city areas. What that gives us is an experience that actually there are some core principles of AP, Ros, that it doesn't matter where you are in the country, because if you get those core principles right, it works, and we can get past some of those barriers. So that's what we're trying to get at with that slide. So to answer your question, what do we do? Next slide, please. That sums it up. What does it look like for our pupils? So what we do, we're not a small version of a mainstream school. So the first step is understanding the needs of the young people, their families, and why they have got the need for AP and why they've been referred to us. So we look at the referral, and then there's a significant period of induction, trying to understand what that young person needs in order to be successful, and how do we do that. And then the first thing we do, and what we do with every young person, and some need more, some need less, is that it's based on re-engagement. And what that slide is intended to do is show you that we're not just going to start, come to us and we're going to teach you how to read. We're going to teach you how to do quadratic equations. We're going to, do an inspector calls. We will do that. We'll do all of that. But what we're going to do first is re-engage you in your learning and find something that you're successful with and build on that resilience. And that could be outdoor learning, which we've got with the young person on the sailboat or building the raft, or it could be through music therapy. It could be through a therapy dog. It could be by getting onto a vocational course where they learn about construction. It could be about working, doing charity work. But whatever it is, it's designed to re-engage them at their level. So they'll come in, they'll get an induction, we'll understand what their needs are, and then their curriculum is built around them and their needs. Someone asked a really good question about the therapeutic approaches and how we fund them. All of that is universal. That's not about getting specialists in that cost lots and lots of money to do therapeutic approaches. That's about offering every young person a therapeutic approach through their curriculum and building curriculum pathways that meets their needs. And that's how we're able to build capacity within that therapeutic approach. Once they're engaged, Ros, and their families engaged and they feel safe and they feel welcome in that environment, and they know that they can fail and come back again, they can dysregulate and call us all the names under the sun, but they're going to be come back in and they're going to be engaged. That's when we start to layer on the English, the maths. Yes, we will teach them how to read. Yes, we will learn how to write CVs, college applications, all the things they need to be successful in life. But it starts with that engagement curriculum, and it starts with that mindset that it's about meeting the needs of the young people, not the provision, the young people coming and meeting our, where we adjust for them, they don't adjust for us. That's essentially what the basis of it is. And how you fund it is by doing it through curriculum pathways. It's not about just, we have got speech and language professionals, we've got ed psychs, we've got counsellors who will do the more specialist work, but essentially every curriculum pathway is based on a therapeutic approach. Does that answer that question? Wonderful. So to give you an idea of why we know that works is the next slide, which isn't what we're about, but it shows that there's success, that there are averages for young people who enter PRUs and APs around GCSE progress and attainment. They are very low. We're going from a very low base. I'm not going to try and pretend, but we are way above both of those averages. And on top of that, which is more important, is that in some cases, particularly around progress, the progress our young people are making is getting close to national averages for mainstream. It's not beating them. I'm not going to pretend that it does. And, I don't think we'll ever quite get to that point because of the cohort we have. But the aspiration is there and the ambition is there. And that's why, again, harking back to Christine Lenehan, that's absolutely important, that if we're going to talk about a SEND system, it's got to be based on high ambition, high expectations for all our young people. And that's what we feel we're doing. Okay, we've got till 1 o'clock, so I'm doing much better with time this time. This is good. Okay, so moving on to, so that's what happens in our academy. So our work, those 4 circles represent all the work we do. Now, at its heart, our Olive family, our academies, and the young people within them is absolutely central, because if we don't get that right, what right do we have to go out and talk to other people about going to Brighton, for example, and speaking to Brighton about their AP system? It needs to be grounded in credibility, and the young people that we've got within our academies need to be getting a really, really good deal. But what it's allowed us to do by doing that work is building on the other areas of work that we do. So that expertise that we've built, and our staff and Colette here in the call, who's been leading 2 of our academies for many years, that expertise that we've got built in within our academies is allowing us to then share that and have a wider reach and have an impact across different levels. So developing outreach programs, which I'll come to in a moment, working with our local authorities and other local authorities like Brighton, for example, to develop their AP systems, working with the DFE on the change programme through the REACH consortium, working with Ofsted to develop the new inspection framework and making sure inclusion is threaded through that. We've got seats at those tables and it's based on the credibility of the work that we're doing in our academies. So Without the Olive family, none of it's possible, and they will always remain central to what we do, but it does allow us to have a wider reach. So how do we do that? We don't work in silos. So if we could look at the next slide, you will, sorry, just move on one more, please. Our partners, you'll see there's a real range of organisations that we work with, because we recognised from day one that AP is too small. AP settings are too small to work on their own. If you do that, you're never going to be successful. And you can see that every single one of those organisations we have some type of working relationship with, whether it's Garfield Weston, who provide us with additional funding to run an outreach programme, the Pairs Family School, who've helped us develop parenting programmes around engaging young people with SEMH needs, through to one that might seem a bit of an outlier, the British Racing School, but it's not an outlier when you think about its therapeutic approach in equine therapy. Working with horses, some of these young people absolutely, they can go from being the hardest young person within an inner city area to going out to a stud, and it's a completely different experience for them. But all of those partners allow us to have a wider reach and allow us to have high quality provision for our young people. Before I move on to outreach, that's Olive. I want to talk a bit about outreach and the continuing provision, but that's Olive. Is there any questions on what Olive is doing and how we work? And I hope some of it's clear, but not always sure. Ros?
I'm a great person for questions. Really interested in how you work with the parents of your children and young people, because so my experience is, those families are often quite battered by their experiences, and
I'm going to bring in Colette, because this is Colette's superpower, so I will let her explain that to you.
Not so sure about superpower, but it's critical. It's the first thing that we do. So when a young person gets referred to us, it's about that partnership with the home, and building those bridges, because as you said, a lot of the time the parents themselves have had quite a challenging time in education, or feel let down, feel very isolated. So it's about building those relationships with them, building their confidence, and that can be in all sorts of formats, really. We have quite a formal parenting program where we invite particular parents along, and that was in the partnership with Pairs Family School as well, where we follow a program linked into building the parents' self-confidence and parenting skills, down to coffee mornings where they can come and talk to parents in similar situations and not feel so isolated and vulnerable. We offer workshops for our parents linked into our curriculum so they can understand it, because it can be quite daunting, and just keeping that contact going. So part of our pastoral inclusion package is contacting the parents frequently, so they have their own designated person, adult, that they talk to. They build that relationship, and it allows them to open up and to work with us to support their child. So absolutely crucial in the work that we do. We make our schools a hub of the community, and open to our parents, so key in what we're doing.
I think the other principle, Ros, which works extremely well, is that the AP is an open environment for our parents. They don't need appointments. There's no barriers. So if they want to come in, they come in, and then they're welcome. And that's always, and it takes a long time to get that trust, actually. It's not immediate. We can, as if you as working in that sector, just saying to them, come in, it's not going to work. It's not how the life works, is it? Exactly. So, but over time, that is developed. It's a lot harder in rural areas. So Suffolk, our academy is in Stowmarket, and we've got young people travelling from Lowestoft 50 miles away. So how do the parents engage? It's a trick. So we go to them. So we do the community engagement stuff in libraries or community centres closer to them, trying to do any which way to just make them feel part of our provision. Okay, outreach, Adiba, if we could just go to that, back to, is it up? I'm sorry. So that's how we frame it. It's called Olive Outreach, but what it actually is about tier 1 provision. That's what it's about. It's about working with young people not in the AP. So it's a range of interventions. It's a whole variety of creative tier 1 provisions that allow young people to stay in their mainstream schools. And it's got to be, going back to, you know, the key components of AP. If we don't get this part of it right and get it commissioned, we won't solve that problem about why APs are filling up. We won't solve that knotty issue about how do we make sure that the young people who do reach AP, it's right, they're in the right place. We've got to get this point right. And if we could just go to the next slide, what that actually looks like is it's the paragraph at the bottom is the actual key to it. It's working with the young people at most risk of exclusion, right from when they start getting maybe their first suspensions, understanding how do we stop that young person ending up in an AP, tailor-making, like we do with that slide with the therapy dog and the sailing, etc. How do we wrap around a curriculum that supports their needs early? Now, mainstream schools have got a horrible job that they might have, you know, some of them have 2,000 young people in there. How do you do that at scale? Well, working with AP is part of that part of that solution. It's not the whole solution, and it never will be, but it's part of it. We can support with that, and the more we do upstream, the more we can work with our mainstream colleagues and work in partnership with them, because they're crying out for it as well. They want that support, of course they do. So how do we do that? And the next slide is a model of how we do it. It's a very high level model, but it is every one of our outreach program. We run 6 programs across 4 LAs, and we worked with, I think, 300, just under 300 young people in terms of outreach last year. And there's a whole range of what could be termed as outreach. It's not what outreach, the model of outreach that we need to move away from is one person coming in and sitting next to one young person in a school and coming up with a nice little report and say, do this and go away school, you need to do that. That's not what it's about. There's got to be support in mainstream schools, outreach support, which is, so if you look at those 4 buckets in line, support in mainstream schools, what we want to do, what we do in Suffolk, for example, in that bucket is that we go in and we provide an assessment service. So, and it's a triage service, really. Schools come to us and say, look, we've got this young person, we've done everything we believe we can do with them. Can you come and provide another set of eyes around our systems, processes and structures that might identify a need that's been diagnosed, or a strategy that might work, or a piece of training that you can help us deliver, and we build capacity that way. That's what happens in Suffolk. In Thurrock, that support in mainstream schools is about working with year 4-5 pupils who need to transition into a mainstream school at year 7, but working with them from year 5, not thinking about this in the last term of their year 6. How do you get them transitioned into mainstream school then? How do we do that with young people who are vulnerable really early on? And we provide that support. Outreach in mainstream schools, the second pillar there, that is that traditional model. We try to steer away from it as much as we can, but we do it if the need is there to prevent a young person being excluded. The third pillar, in reach respite, it's part of tier 1 service. How do we, and we do this in 2 of our local authorities, it's not about them having a short-term placement that they're with us for 6 to 8 weeks non-stop. This is about in reach being, maybe they might need to come to us for a day a week to work on a specific part of their curriculum, or a bit of re-engagement, but it's done in our safe environment. And the idea being, it's turning the dial on AP being a sanction, or AP being somewhere you get kicked out to. No, it's the right provision for that young person in that time. But we work, and it's done in proper partnership with their mainstream schools. And then the 4th pillar is the one we try to avoid, but if we have to do it, it's an absolutely critical part of outreach support, stopping young people being permanently excluded and receiving the trauma of being PX'd and kicked out of a school, their families feeling that they've failed their young person, that they have that horrible process where they have to receive a permanent exclusion, go through the appeal, go to tribunal, whatever, that whole ridiculous, horrible process that everyone has to go through. Well, if they're the right child for us, let's just transition them in smoothly, gently. Let's do it where it's supportive, that the family wants to come to us. That's tricky, but that's how it should be, and that's what we do. Now that's high level, and there's a whole load of provision that sits under each of those buckets there, but that's the idea. And if anything comes from today, it's that idea that Christine Lenehan was talking, that this needs to be a tiered approach. And if we don't move to this being what AP should be about, that slide being about what high quality AP should be about, then we're not going to get to where we need to get to. The final slide is just a tiny little case study about the outreach program Colette's runs, or doesn't run anymore, but set up and used to run. And it kind of gives you, and I thought the quote, I always like to end with the quote because it's from a young person and it's real and tells you why outreach is so important. And that's me. Questions, chat, conversation.
You've stunned everybody, Adam.
I've spoken too much, I know that.
Just to say thank you, this has been brilliant and very insightful, and it all feels extremely positive. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you.
I think
we do genuinely are positive, by the way.
Word that comes to mind.
Sorry.
I was going to say exemplary is the word that comes to mind.
But the positive bit is real. We do genuinely feel that, you know, what we do, we work with very vulnerable young people, and it's tough. You know, we you know, the staff that we've got are exceptional and they deal with very difficult situations, but it's working in a way where they get an awful lot out of it, and that's how it should be. And so I'm glad that has come across, because that's how we want it to be.
Hi, I have a quick question. So
Sure.
I sit in our local integrated care board. I'm a children's commissioner, I guess with a SEND lens. And I guess AP is something we don't know a great deal about in health, you know, hold our hands up. And I'd just be interested to know how you work with your local ICBs or health providers with this cohort of children, and how do you think we can support them better?
I've got in terms of the ICB, it's difficult there, and it is varied. I have to say, Denise, there are a couple that will directly fund some of our provision. You know, they will directly come in, but that's not at high levels, and it certainly isn't universal that happens everywhere. But where I think, what am I trying to say here? Have you heard of the Alternative Provision Specialist Task Forces? There's a pilot of there's 17 of these pilots, and it's about wrapping support around alternate provisions, so working with the ICBs in those areas in order to provide speech and language, ed psych counsellors to the AP, that then they are able to refer and place where it's most needed. So it works with around the AP that then has a network of schools. And that model, although the official findings for that model haven't been published yet in that pilot, I know loads of them, and they, you know, the green shoots there. It's, if you've been around long enough, Denise, it's that back when the late 90s, early 2000s, when we were able to do that around schools, where you could go into schools and they had that service. So it's not rocket science, but that's the closest example I've got where the ICBs are working directly with alternate provisions and making it a success. So yeah, I can do it offline and show you, signpost you a couple of the APST models so you can have a look. But yeah, that would be the closest we've got to that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, Ross.
Well, I was going to say, I think, like, to open up the conversation in a way, I think Adam's been quite I can't think, discreet or sensitive in how he sort of speaks about that. But the experience that we'd see, and we have a brilliant ICB in the area where I work, but the experience on the ground is that significant numbers of children that end up on a trajectory towards AP, actually it is health services that might have made a difference. not just, you know, and we put it all on schools and a schools meeting the child's needs, but it is about, you know, neurodevelopmental pathways. It is about campus service. You know, that's the reality. But you know, we all need to work in partnership, and we know the stresses and strains on the health services. So you know, it's a sort of being realistic, but you know, it's disproportionately children with speech and language needs, or you know, yeah.
I think it's having a good graduated approach in your local area, and is all working in partnership, and each speciality supporting the wider workforce for these young people. I guess that's what we're trying to do, you know, spread the language, spread the word, work together, and make sure we have got a strong graduated approach. So those children that do need our services, those specialist services in health, can access them in a timely manner. We'll get there. It's just
and the
a
focus
lot
on
to do.
send, the focus on send in ICBs increasingly is really positive, because it, you know, I've been around in this world for a long time, and it wasn't there historically in the same way. So it's, you know, we're heading in a better direction.
Yeah, people get fed up of me talking about send. I come along with my send flag, waving it at all different meetings. So yeah, there's a growing number of us in health.
From an Olive perspective, one of the things we strongly believe is that a lot of these young people could be intervened with without, you know, a clinical diagnosis, and the need for those professionals, because they're so, you know, they're so rare, and you know, their time is so precious, that actually we want them to work with what the young people who need it the most. But we've got professionals in our schools who, with a bit of capacity training, could do an awful lot of that before it needs a proper clinical diagnosis. And I think ICBs have a huge role to play in that. You know, it's that capacity building, and we would certainly welcome any, you know, we work with lots of universities who allow us to have access to some of their students in these areas that provide us with additional support. But yeah, you know, an approach that's, you know, a very strategic approach around how we can build capacity in and around things like ADHD, ASD would be very, very helpful. Wonderful. Well, I think, unless there's any other questions, and just two things, I know the evaluation is there that I've been asked to ask about, so please do that. And then the second one is, if there's anything, you know, around AP that you want to follow up outside of the meeting, please, you've got the email address as part of the link and all the rest of it. Colette and I would be only too happy to have a conversation or answer any questions that you have. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Ross.